My guest today is Petra Salarić. Petra is a multiple award-winning researcher, designer, an activist, and a founder of Taboo, the first consultancy in the world that specializes in taboos. Petra has worked for almost 10 years in different areas of design and art, from graphic design to scenography, and across 3 continents before specializing in the area of taboos. Petra's framework of working on taboo topics is currently the only existing framework that guides how to deal with taboos in projects. With her work, Petra aims to create space and the opportunity for people to talk about taboos we usually do not get to talk about, in order to be able to deal with these issues, take control, and achieve our full potential. In this episode, we talk about UX design, especially in the context of online intimacy, taboos, what they are, why, and how to work with them, and more broadly, Petra's unique perspective. How do you introduce yourself to people? What do you say?
Yeah, how do I say? Okay. I find it very funny because I always say what I do, but then I never really say who I am. So I'll start, I'm a human. No. I mean, yeah, so my name is Petra. I come originally from Croatia, but I also had the privilege of living in even 7 countries. So I call myself very cliche, a global woman. I'm a designer by trade, but currently I'm also a researcher and I'm also an activist. I think actually the activist one is probably the longest standing. I started working in the area of design for well-being, which focuses on how do services, products, environments, systems, so whatever basically a person interacts with, how does that influence the user's well-being, and how can we recreate it, redesign it to leverage the well-being. And for the past couple of years, I have been working a lot in the domain of taboos. So basically, how do taboos or sensitive topics influence people, and how can we also work on them and work around them as well to support people, especially on the area of taboo that influences another person's life.
To pull the rope a little more, what about the researcher bit and the activist bit? So the researcher was the taboo. Is it centered on taboo? Sorry, and
Yeah.
the activist, what kind of activism?
Yeah, thank you. So the research, I'm currently doing my PhD in Loughborough University in the UK, and my PhD is on the influence of online communication on intimacy building. But before that, I started researching on taboo topics. So my first was with taboo of menstruation in India. And after that, I just really got very fascinated by this topic because there's no one really working on it. And if you actually really stop and think, these are the issues that influence, I think, the most humans' well-being, but also societal well-being. So that is why, of course, I work on my PhD and now in my final year. But I think overall, I would more categorize myself in the taboo topics. And as an activist, I'm a feminist, but I have also been working mostly in the past year and a half on abortion rights. So I'm running a online abortion support group back at home in Croatia, which is currently the only online support group actually that exists in the country, as far as I know.
Like the obvious question that I think everyone will be asking themselves about is why the PhD not on taboo and on influence of online on intimacy topics?
Because COVID, Matthew, COVID. So it was, in full honesty, I finished my master's. I was working a bit in an institute. So I did my master's in the Netherlands, in Delft. And then I worked for a bit in an institute over there. And I went back home for a few holidays and I started applying for the industry because I realized like I want to do research, but I also know that doing a PhD and then after that searching for a job, if you're not in the engineering department, so if you're an engineer, that's fine. But if you're anything but an engineer, it's going to be very hard for you to go back into the industry because a lot of people see doing a PhD just as an extended studying and not as actually conducting any work, unfortunately. So I wanted to go into the industry, but then literally a month after I started applying, I got the COVID started, so I got a lot of rejections for the jobs because everything was closing. People were being fired, not that people were searching for applications and opening positions. And I was just really fascinated by the topic. So I applied. It was an open call in my university, and I knew my supervisor because she was part of the same research group as my supervisor in the Netherlands, which is Design for Emotion research group. And I think there's literally 6 people in the world in that research group. And I thought, I've never been to UK. Why not another country to live in to put to my list? And she just did really cool work. And so I spoke to her and we discussed a couple of topics. But I think also the way that I phrase taboos, I'm not even sure if I actually apply taboos. I think it was my current PhD was one of the topics. Another topic which I'm really fascinated by is using color as a method for some sort of therapy. So how do we actually react to color in different ways, and how if we place that color into different domains. So for example, to make it a bit more concrete, so if you have a piece of paper on A4 and then you start writing on pink paper with a black pen, that's one effect that's going to go into your brain and perception of color. And of course, this is very cultural to understand, because if you have a red paper, a person, let's say in Croatia, will understand it in one way, but a person in China will understand it another way based on what that red means. Because in China, red is actually a color of happiness, not just as we perceive it as a color of love or a color of blood. And so I was really curious about that, and I still try to play with it as much as I can, though there's really little research, and especially there's really little research that has actually proven that to be a statement. So of course, because the color is a stimuli, it's gonna influence you to a certain degree and over a certain period of time, but you can't actually scientifically prove it how long that stimuli is gonna last for everyone. So that I really found it curious, because I realized that for me, subconsciously started using papers in different color and markers in different color in order to actually influence myself for productivity and for happiness. So I was like, this would be really cool actually to use that as a PhD with design and different type of interventions. But I think also, speaking of time, because any research that you do also needs to be time relevant, not just, of course, it's fantastic if it's relevant forever, but time relevant. The intimacy one, so the one that I'm currently doing was quite, I think, interesting for everyone. And it was also a time when I was applying, it was 2019, no, it was 2020. And I think Tinder came out around 2016, and it was just about to start to have this, not all like Tinder is interesting, but it was really present, and people had this already an adoption of the application quite well, rather than something being new. So it was a perfect time to actually go and think about, okay, what is a possible long-term effect of these dating applications? And I can even tell you a story about how this idea came about, because it's also like the first page of my PhD thesis. So I was sitting with a friend of mine in a bar in Delft. And Delft is, I don't know if you have been, but for those who haven't been in Delft, it's a gorgeous town. It's a small town, but it's a university town. A big percentage of the place is actually students who come and they leave, they do their studies, maybe they do their PhD. Of course, they also have researchers, but it's like a very young and vibrant and fast-paced student place. And we were sitting, me and my friend, in this bar having a beer, and he came out as gay. And so we were thinking, okay, let's see if you can match with someone. So we downloaded Grindr, and he and I are both this sort of intimacy sensitive people, like very emotional, definitely not the type of one night stands people. And we download Grinder. And I don't know if you have seen how Grinder looks like, but
No.
basically it looks exactly like Pornhub. Exactly. Like the colors are the same. You have black and orange. Even the logo is a small rechange of how Pornhub looks like. And the way that
As
people
you can see, I saw Pornhub.
You're not saying a no. No, no judgment here. As you can see, I also know how Pornhub looks like. But there is the images of people, how they're presented, everything. And so I realized we started, it was 10 minutes of interaction, maybe less. And all of a sudden we changed. Like we started like judging people. We started making like bad remarks. Oh my God, who does this person think that they're gonna pick up? Look at this guy. Look at how he presents himself. Oh, such a natural photo. And then we closed the app like after, because you start feeling something. Like we started, oh, this has a very bitter taste. And then all of a sudden we closed the application and we looked at each other, whoa, what the hell just happened?
It
Like,
was his first time too on Grinder.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we were just like, what did just happen? And we were like, we changed, like we full on changed. And the way that we reacted to other people changed. And I was just like, I was shocked. I was really, wow, this is like, this was literally me, not me. And how did I not become myself in this interaction with this product? And then in hindsight, I started thinking about, I have a couple of friends who go on dating apps. At that time, I wasn't on an app, I was in a relationship. And I was like, and I realized, oh my God, some of the people that I know who are on a dating app, and I just started thinking of certain situations. Like they start dating this person, maybe for a month, maybe for two. And then when a moment comes, when a moment like some sort of series that needs to be solved, they're like, oh, it's not happening. It's not going, it's not the thing. And just cut it off, swipe for another person. And I started, especially with one person who came to the Netherlands and he's from India. I don't know if that's even relevant, but I just noticed that he also felt like in a sort of sense of liberated, like knowing that, oh my God, I'm in this university town. There's so many people here that I can be having sex with. And don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing bad like in wants to have sex. Hell, it's healthy. But I just am thinking like, to what extent is the behavior of people their own choice, their autonomy, and to what extent is it triggered or influenced or controlled by this dating application? Because a lot of people, and I started talking to people, even who don't use dating apps, about this idea of, oh, but there's plenty fish in the sea. And I think that is what dating apps do, which is fantastic if you're a shy person, if you don't have easy like skills for communication, for coming to someone. But for me, it was just fascinating to think about to what extent was this dating app actually influencing people to behave and to form relationships, and to what extent actually do we have our choice? Because I was definitely not a person. I didn't have nothing against dating apps, but I definitely had a lot against the behavior that I had when I interacted with Grindr. I had a lot against it, but it full on became subconscious. And then this kind of thought extended just the dating apps, because the time in a relationship that I was in, me and my partner, we didn't have a healthy communication. And I realized that a lot of what he was saying to me when he opened up was via the WhatsApp or Instagram or Messenger. And I was just like thinking there is something there, and I just wanted to figure out it more. That was how this PhD actually came about. And especially because as a designer in the well-being area, I always think about what is the fundamental need of people. What is that we really need, and what is it that we really want? And there is a direct, the design of the applications and the way that we do things and products, they don't trigger your wish for an action or your wish for a result. For example, I always give this example of mowing lawn for the garden. If I'm going to ask you why you want to buy a mowing lawn, you can say, oh, because I want to be able to mow my lawn very quickly. Okay, why is that important to you? And then you can say millions of things. You can say, I want to mow along quickly because I want to be efficient in my life. Why is that important? Because I want to have a feeling of control. Or you can say, which is then the need for autonomy, right? Or you can say, I want to mow my lawn because it's a ritual for me and I find it very peaceful. So it's my self care moment. Or you can say, I want to mow my lawn because I want to have a very nice garden so that, sorry, the
No,
aesthetic,
aesthetics, yeah.
yeah, the aesthetics, or for example, so that my neighbors don't judge me because I care
Mm.
about what society thinks of me. Or you can say, I want to mow my lawn super quickly because my friends are coming and I want to have a fabulous party. And my time with my friends is the most important thing to me. You can have millions of reasons. But mowing the lawn, that product actually is just a small tool, which maybe doesn't even have to be the mower. It can be a person that you hire. It can be plastic lawn if you realize, oh my God, that makes my life really easy because I don't care if it's plastic or if it's natural. So the thing is, as designers, we do that. We make that link into the need, but often I think that especially in the industry and the one that is really quick and focused on profit, that just line doesn't come to think. And I'm lucky enough because this entire area of design is very young, but it's becoming to be more popular. And I just hope, yeah, it gets to be more in there.
You touched on so many things. It's actually quite funny to see that a lot of people, even in marketing, so people who are supposed to be understanding clients, start with the product and then they try to sell the product, the benefits and everything, and they don't
Yeah.
really think about what is the need in between. And these are professionals who have been trained to think about the needs. So imagine about the rest. And then when I think about what you just said, you can't process millions of needs. At least right now we can't because we don't
Mhm.
use AI, and so we rely on human brains and little time. So you end up with archetypes of which are the most common needs, and then you try to either
Yeah.
work on specific needs or specific profiles of people, which are not going to fit everyone. And then
Mm.
also you have the conscious needs, so the thing that people tell you, and then there are the unconscious needs because people are not going to tell you, I don't want to be judged by my neighbors. They're going to tell you the thing before. So
Yeah.
unpacking this whole reality is actually extremely difficult. So I'm not surprised that we can't really do it yet because,
Yeah.
yeah. So basically, that's a difficult thing.
But can I add to that? I didn't even think it's possible if you are creating for the masses. It's impossible. Like you can't know what millions of people is going to do, but there is definitely areas where it should be implemented. Like for me, I think about a lot of any sort of one-on-one interaction. So for example, there has been a lot of, and also these sort of things can fall under participatory design. So once you take people in and you think about, okay, what it is that they need. And this has often been happening in the hospital environment, where it's ridiculous if you think about that architects, designers, they design for a place for doctors. Doctors know how they operate. Designers and architects don't. Like, or the nurses, any sort of medical staff. So if you think about any place where another person is operating and where you can have that link on them, you should be speaking to them. You should be, and even when I think about when you are creating any sort of services for a client, so if a client comes to you, a single person, and they have, let's say, their staff. So for example, if let's say if a director comes to me and he says, I want for you to come to create a service or a workshop or an organization for my staff on sort of taboo, and I can then say, okay, can you tell me a bit more, like, why do you want this, what does this mean to you? And then they can say a million of things. They can say, because there's an issue in my organization and one of the colleagues is really feeling down, so I want for them to feel included. That's one result. Or if another person comes to me and says, you know why? Because this is my new role. I'm new here and I want to create some sort of a cohesion. I want for them to think about that I actually care about them and that they can come to me in the future if they have any issue. Or they can come and say, it's because it's just one of those activities in our L&D kind of agenda. But there's millions of things, but what you ask, like, why is that important? What is this solving for you? Or they can say, I just want to feel appreciated, or I want to feel connected with my staff, or I want for them to better perform. I just need a higher revenue because my high boss is pressuring me. Those are all really different things, and they lead to millions of other results. And sometimes this sort of thing can literally last 3 to 5 minutes extra, which is the thing that is insane to me to think about.
Per person.
Yeah, per person.
Per group. And so when you design for a large group and you just have access to a sample in order to create your product, which is one of the things I've been doing. So there's this thing about basically talking to the stakeholder, which is great if you can, and then you basically need to have longer sales cycles, or like more like people that are trained in that way to be able to unfold that reality. And then the other way that I've been doing is researching what is common to all of us, and usually for humans it goes through the body, right? We all share the same body because the beliefs are cultural and everything. So what is common to everyone, what is universal, and then you try to build on that. But then you go to the base, right? What are the human needs? How do our body operate? And that's the other road that I think we can take. But you can't take it when the service is there to serve a cultural need or something very specific to an industry. You need to go in that depth. But like for well-being that we were talking about earlier, the way I've been approaching it has been what is true about everyone. And it's very hard to get to those answers because you go through the lens of research, and research have specific interests. So then you need to, that's a long journey. I think you're right. The best is to talk with every single person and then build the experience for every single person. That's best. But
yeah. Not everyone wants to have that time. But yeah, I think in the end, it comes to the Simon Sinek's why. Why are you doing this? What is your intention? And and I often stop myself and I think about, okay, why am I doing this? What is the point of this? And it can be really tiring to continuously be thinking about that. But I always try to think down and think, okay, but if I try to get to the root, the project, the product, whatever, is going to be so much better. It's going to fulfill the need. And then the results are going to be better. And of course, not every time do you have the ability or the luxury of the extra time. And sometimes you do have to say, you know what, this does it. Good enough. And that's life. But I think in the end, if our intention is anything but just the revenue, and if our intention is the people, then you need to give yourself that bit of time, get down to the deep. And I really get fascinated all the time when I see how little research people do. For example, I almost pulled my hair out. I was watching Apprentice the other day, and I was just, oh my God, like, how did they even go to do something without research? They got this small brief. They didn't speak to people in the streets. They didn't do this. They didn't. And I was just like, how do you design without research? And I was just like, oh God, okay, this is that pain of the profession. But for me, in my experience, it's just, if you do the research, the result comes out. Like, you don't even almost need to, I think the brainstorming bit after doing the research is 5% of your time. Because if you do enough research, it just comes out. The result, like this small puzzle, like it starts to crystallize. Now, okay, now it's just about finessing and think about that bit. That is for me literally like doing the product. Because if you get the enough data, it becomes like this. Yeah, it literally becomes like this sort of clue coming together. And the only thing that I did was just ask the right questions or ask the right people.
Effortless.
Yeah.
Love it. When we fall in love and when we like someone, it's usually dependent on how big, like who is the most beautiful person in the room for us in that moment. And so usually the rooms are not that big, right? You have 30, 40 people. And if you look at your age group, the size of the criteria that you choose to look at the beauty that you want, then you have very few people actually that you will care about. And I'm just talking about looks because it's easier, and that's
Mm,
basically the first, before you do the first step, usually you're gonna go for looks. At least I was, or
mm.
I am. Yeah, I was. I'm not anymore. And
Mm.
so I think the big problem with Tinder and the other apps is
Yeah.
that you basically have access to the sea of profiles. And
Mm,
so, and actually, they give you opportunities to go beyond the current location you're in. So you actually have access to the whole world.
mm,
And obviously, you're going to go for the most beautiful person in those criteria
mm.
in
Yeah,
whatever room you're given. So if you're given a room with millions of people,
yeah,
everyone is going to gravitate towards like the top, right? And so
yeah,
then you have massive suffering because instead of breaking us down in smaller rooms, and so everyone finds a pair, a match, then
yeah,
everyone is fighting for the top 0.01%. And
yeah,
we are struggling because those people will choose the top 0.001% that they match, and then all the rest is a spectator to that encounter that we don't really know, we don't
yeah.
see. But so that's the first thing. Are you studying this part of the network finding each other a bit?
I did a bit because, of course, it's a massive thing and it's a massive reason why it's proven that dating apps do not work. And not all of them, because now you have really different bits. So, for example, in Netherlands currently, the third most popular dating app, it's called Breeze, and they're actually from my master's. And the way that it operates is that it connects you with one, two, or three people, and then your account is frozen, and they set a date for you with a person, and you need to meet that person live, face to face. And I'll tell you later why is that important. And then after you interact with them, if you see you want to see them again, then your app is unfrozen, and then you can speak with the others. But basically it forces you to actually interact with another person. And the thing that you mentioned about the million of profiles, that's actually called, I call it like the shopping market syndrome, or the syndrome of the overchoice. So for example, the research showed if you have 10 examples of jams, it's harder for you to actually make a choice than if you have one, two, or
Hmm.
three. And not just that, you're going to be happier with your choice if you have one, two, or three than if you have 10. And the same thing is with the dating apps, is that you always know that there is, or maybe a hotter person for me or a better person for me, and etc. And interestingly, the number of people makes you feel actually sad, because how the dating apps work is that you have very high dopamine, and then you have very high hormone of excitement and etc. And then slowly you get very bumps, because it was actually shown that even that feeling that if I like someone and I haven't received that match, I actually, my pain network in my brain gets activated. So you actually feel such doses of pain continuously within that app. For example, it's even, if you start talking with someone and then that person doesn't answer to you, you actually experience ghosting. You don't experience ghosting if you have a relationship with someone outside in the real life. Our brain does not perceive the difference. And that's a really big problem, because we haven't really formed this codex of behavior in the dating apps, because it's really new and it's super fast. But that doesn't mean that our brain understands that. So we still experience pain. But the problem is, which I really find extremely interesting, is that if we think about, let's say, your goal to go on a dating app, there has been identified 10 different reasons why people want to be on a dating app. And hooking up or finding a relationship are only two. And there's a million others, not million, eight others. But what is really interesting for me is that when people think about, okay, I come here because I want a relationship, we first think about the attraction, even though people who we're attracted to is probably not the person that only physically attracted to, is probably not the person we're going to end up in a relationship with. Not necessarily, it happens, but it's not always the case. People who we feel initially attracted to, people who we want to hook up, and people who we want to actually form a relationships are three different people most often. And people go for these sort of initial animalistic things that are also often connected to our bad or unresolved childhood traumas or attachments. And if you do not realize that, if you do not solve for that, going on into these relationships can be hard or it can be unsuccessful. So I think when it comes to the dating apps, and also the other thing is we create profiles based on how we want to be seen, not on who we actually are. So, and the other reason why it's really important to actually go as quick as possible face to face. And of course, to a certain degree, it's not secure. So you also have to have a really good radar over what are the conversations that you have, how is the other person behaving, and of course there's a perceived vulnerability, but then again that existed also if you meet the person face to face. But it was also shown that if we extend the communication over 2 weeks time, we start to understand the people. So we, and it's human in us that we understand the messages as we want to understand them, not as actually people say them or as people mean them. So if you extend the communication over 2 weeks, you actually are most probably going to be disappointed because you're going to have all of this persona over what that person is, how they look like, what they mean, how they react. And then that's not going to meet the real life situation. So yeah, so there's a million of aspects, and I think the most important thing is just you have to come into it open-minded. You have to come into it understanding that probably what you have in your head or what you think is not going to be, and then you just go with it. But I see a lot of people being like, for example, the number of red flags, the number of check boxes is becoming higher and higher, and so is the disappointment as well. It's a really complex thing because also if you take societal structures and how societal structures are being changed, not to mention women being more independent, more financially, more personally, also sexually free, the social dynamics is really changing. But it is also concerning the number of people that are being lonely. And I did a study of, I was up for 4 weeks on dating apps and I tested 4 different dating apps. It took me a good month and a half to actually get back to myself because it was extremely hard. It was extremely vulnerable to be on that. So yeah, they are a lot. They can be definitely a lot.
When you were talking, one thing came to me was the fact that you go for the biggest network. So Tinder at the moment gets a lot of people, not because the user experience or the dynamics are great. We don't go there for this. We go there because most of them are Tinders. And then we have other apps. And the other apps, I was hoping that some of them would have more users because the user experience was better. I don't remember at the time, but I think I used Bumble. I think
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
one where you had more stories, like you could write a little text. So it's also you craft your
yes,
profile, but you don't craft it only with pictures. You can tell a story of
yeah.
who you are. And I thought that was what beautiful one. And it was very enjoyable to read
Mm,
others. It's like it was like an art form almost beyond
mm,
just the pics, because you can also do professional pictures on your profile, but it goes very quickly into fake. You can see the
yes.
fakeness. And in words, it was beautiful because you can ask someone else to write for you, but come on. I
Mm.
was hoping that I was reading other people's profile, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, yeah,
And but you didn't have so many people in this app, so
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one I was thinking about also was, I wish the first point of contact or the first filter
Mhm.
was not the photos. And I wish we could say, okay, what am I interested in about, or what are my
Mhm.
values, or some more interesting thing from the start, so that whoever is
Mm,
physically attractive, at least they're in your filters, at least they care about the
mm.
same things you do. And I didn't find any app like that. Um,
Yeah, the thing is also when it comes to the dating apps, they're coming and they're also changing. So for example, Tinder now is actually changing their UI as similar as to Bumble. And then second thing is also we have Hinge, which I really like
I tried
because
this one too. Yeah.
yeah, because they have now a research lab. So they
Mm.
actually collaborate. You have psychologists and really good ones collaborating with designers as well. And also what you mentioned about the values, and I think it's also something that, and I can't say that everyone is like this, but I also try to think about people often write what they think they should write. So, for example, in my research, because in the UK, it's also a different culture and certain things are more important. So, for example, some sort of stability. Guys were writing such as, oh, I have a house, I have a car, like this sort of like material possessions. But also, if you find it important about what are my values, then you write the values and you see who reacts to what. Like if someone
Yeah, but
reacts,
it's too much. You're putting you were speaking about animalistic side and the more
yeah,
conscious side. If you put the picture and the values, come on, who's
but it's also about what picture you put. So, for example, if someone reacts to only to a picture of your bum, then you get the answer of, what person it is. If you write, for example, if you post your picture of I'm traveling or you're working some art or about your favorite book and these sort of things. And the second thing is also based on what app you go to. So, for example, Tinder in the US has 70% male users. And if I'm a woman and if I think about, oh, I want to go for a hookup, I won't go to Bumble, I'll go to Tinder. And so there was another study actually showing how the marketing or the perceived usage or perceived purpose of different dating apps is also gonna direct who is going to use them. So you don't just have, okay, the way the dating app operates is also we already know what is used for what.
yeah.
So Bumble is now it's going stronger to being like, even when it comes to not just because originally I know that it was mostly women because men didn't really enjoy this idea of just having just that the women can react to it. But then you also have Hinge, which is very subtle and its design is very the start of communication, you have to react to something. So I think that of course there's that image like saturation, and there is also research that does that if you only have that big image, because I remember when I was doing the study, Tinder had this massive image of the person over my entire screen with just the name, and then only if I click and if I scroll, I would get to find a bit more.
Yeah.
But then what do you expect when you hear the founder saying that the entire idea of Tinder was to resemble like that machine slots in Las
Mm.
Vegas? What do you think is gonna do? Of course, that was the entire point. And if you have a founder saying very openly and not with no shame, but by saying, yeah, we literally wanted to do that, you can't think that it's gonna facilitate any sort of intimate connections. It may, if you connect with with a person who finds the same. For example, I found my ex on Tinder and we were both like, we spoke for first 3 weeks about different types of love languages and about different types of conflict resolution and what we find important because we facilitated that. But then I think there is, of course, one aspect where, for me, which is interesting and why I'm researching, is to understand how does design influence something. But then comes also another level where you have to think about, okay, what is important to me and what are the conversations that I want to have? And how can I filter them in these, let's say, 2 weeks that I have with this person before I meet them
Yeah, but
one-on-one?
you seem to be clear about your values. Most people are
Yeah.
not. You are educated about all those things work. You have a meta. You have you animalistic. You have you not, and then you have the researcher in you. So you're able to have different levels of abstraction that most people don't. So the question, I'm almost thinking about those physical. You have the physical space, and in countries, every
Mm.
country has laws to say, okay, an apartment must have a kitchen, and they must have
Yeah.
a bathtub, and not a bathtub, a bathroom, etc. And so you can't really rent an apartment if there's no toilet, for instance. It will not be on the market. And we allow online spaces, and I like freedom, so I'm not asking for more legislation, but I'm thinking we are so open to any experimentation online. We
Mm.
would never let these things happen in the physical world, but we agree to make them happen on the online world as if it had no impact. And
Mm.
it's completely wrong. And so I'm almost hopeful. At the beginning, you were saying if I'm not an engineer, having a PhD is actually very hard for me to go back to the industry. I'm
Mm.
almost, based on everything we speak about, you spoke about Breeze coming from university into startup. And I
Mm.
was almost thinking those Inch guys are also recruiting scientists to do this.
Mm,
like every company should have some people thinking about the human side of things and be like, okay, let's just take a look at like a philosophical look, an ontological look, and bring that wisdom, because obviously the marketers and the business owners are going to think about the profit or the
mm.
views, or like maximizing some other metrics than well-being.
Yeah, yeah. No, of course they should. I mean, I would also, how do you say, I would also disagree with you to a certain extent that we don't have this in real life. Like, if you go to any bar or any club, you will notice that at a certain hour, they will level up the music. And I think
Mm.
there is, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm fully disagreeing with how dating apps operates. Let's get that clear, because otherwise I wouldn't be researching it. But I also want to say that I also want to put the view as well of other researchers that I come across, which they say that often any sort of behavior that we have on apps are also some that operate for us in the real life. So what I'm saying is, if I have these skills to have these conversations in person, I'm also going to have them online, and I'm going to search for a place that enables me to do that.
Mm.
And another thing is that if you read any sort of book that speaks about love, every single book, the first thing they're going to tell you is know yourself and know what you're looking for. So that's why I'm saying that often people who have certain insecurities, who have certain mental health issues, if you go and you seek validation on dating apps, you're not going to find it, and it's going to be bitter. And so dating apps don't facilitate really like necessarily a good feeling, because I'm not making this up. This is research proven, not just by my own, but by different one. But also, it can push us into feeling something that we don't if we're coming with certain expectations. So that's why I'm saying it's really important to use this with a certain caution. Hinge, as I said, they have a research lab. So obviously they want to create something well. Bumble, I hope that they follow what their founder says. So I listened to the podcast episode with Stephen Bartlett on the Diary of CEO with Whitney Hurd as the founder, and she said that the entire premise of them was to basically allow women to have control, because there's a number of relationships with domestic violence and everything, and here women get to have the choice, and that's why with the very simple thing of them starting the communication. Now, that may be very extra to say that, but it definitely did make a shift in the perception of the power in sex and in relationships. But they also mentioned how she mentioned in this episode, and it came out, I think, in December or Jan of this year. And she said how they want to instill trust into their users in the online environment, because people still like, one of the biggest problems when it comes to online environment in general is the issue of trust and the issue of engagement, because it's so hard to keep people engaged. But number one, for me, that came was trust and safety. And so for her, she says that they really want to create trust in their users within this app. And I hope that that is true. But a majority of other apps, it's a money making. It literally is money
Yeah, of
making.
course.
And so what I'm trying to say is that probably is not going to change. But something that we can do is, and you talk about freedom, and something that we can do is also to have freedom within us. And for me, that is the knowledge, and that's creating and
Mm.
understanding yourself, understanding why you behave the way you behave. Why do you need what you need? Is my need of something because I want it, or is it because I'm insecure about something, or I haven't delved into something? So for me, that is the liberation. If I know what I want, I'm going to go and find it, and I'm going to know where I can find it. Or if I realize, oh, I don't know, I found this guy or a girl who is sexy, but also I really like what they say. So let me go move myself from the app once I find to be comfortable and once I have the interest to know more about them, and go on a video call, go on something where I can see that person more and see how they operate, or go on, for example, sometimes even just having the Instagram attached to get to see how their world looks like
Yeah,
outside of these 4 or 5 pictures.
yeah. I hear you. I think where I would come from, so I'm valuing freedom a lot. And as I talk with you, I restrict my freedom because I want to create safeguards. So I need to be mindful of the balance. But I'm not going to try to be balanced. The big question that I have is, because we know first we have like our ideal self, or like the values that we have and everything, we can't maintain them all the time. If we were able to, then we would be some kind of Buddha or Jesus. So there's always these up and downs. And so
Yeah.
it's, you look for your life as this ideal life and you work towards it, like putting more discipline in your life, self-inquiry, all these different things. And then you have those moments where you go down, you are tired or you're sad, and then you just try to mitigate that bad feelings. So some people, they're actually very wise and they experience the feeling and they better feel instead of trying to feel better. But it's not most people. Most people, they would try to escape. And so I'm almost thinking always, when I look at products and experience, I'm always thinking, how can you help both the construction and life at this higher level with safeguards so that people don't go so low, so that not letting them going so low restricts freedom and restricts experience, so it's not that great. But looking at the apps, I understand what you say. Yeah, of course, the app is just one part of your life, one space, and you need to create your entire ecosystem of spaces and just manage it yourself, and it's your responsibility. I hear you there. But every interaction is an opportunity to teach or to educate. And that's where I feel that the education, you're educating people towards the negative self or the negative patterns
Yeah.
instead of empowering them to live their better life.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, this is what you talk about basically. It's like, how can you help people have the right conversations? And maybe after, like what Breeze was doing, is basically creating this kind of path that we know is more healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From what I saw, they also include this well-being aspect. So they also have, I think I first saw it on Bumble, and I believe now a lot of more of them incorporated that too, where they give you like literally a stat, like a window with, we know that this is hard and dating can be hard. Check yourself. If you experience this, go there. If you experience this, go there. And I think there's also that ability also to report someone. So for example, on Hinge, if you want to unmatch someone, they ask you why. And there's 10 different reasons. So you can just say for no reason, you can just say, I'm not interested in this person. This person didn't behave in a way that I wanted to. This person didn't present themselves. And of course, like
You have
that's,
the triad. Is a psychopath?
yeah, something like that, I'm sure is there. But what I'm trying to say is, of course, that there is a certain accountability that these apps can do in creating the support. And I think a lot is as well in even how you create your profile. So what they ask you, what is important to you? So these sort of questions, instead of say 3 of your interests, just framing it as what is important to you, can also help in people thinking more about, oh, wait, what is important to me? I haven't thought about that. I thought I was just gonna
Too long. I'm going to Tinder.
this is too deep for me. I want just a hookup. I just want a good Friday evening. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So what's the goal of the thesis? You want to make recommendations for app builders or for actual people living their life?
So currently I created the framework, which I'm trying to test. So actually I have a conversation today with Bumble, so keep your fingers crossed.
I do. Lovely.
And
It seems like a no-brainer. It's like after just we spoke for 1 hour. I think after 30 minutes, like why can't you do this paid by Bumble
yeah,
or whoever? Yeah,
the how much I spoke well about them and about Hinge, they should definitely give me some commission.
totally,
Uh,
totally.
but
I'm not on their target market anymore, so you're not doing a great job.
oh, let's see if I sell it well. But yeah, that's all about what is important. And also what do they have time? Because that's something I realize. These applications, they don't have the time.
But they have enough cash to finance people like you. They do.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. I'm gonna tell them that. I know you got the money.
Yeah,
So give
exactly.
me.
No, but maybe you will have the conversation the way you want to have it. But I think back to square one you were speaking about earlier.
Mm.
What do you need? what is it that I do that you can leverage? Because they probably have big problems, and
Mm.
also they have their own relationship with lawmakers and politicians to try to enable a better life for everyone.
Oh.
Yeah,
Mm.
I don't know what angle will work, but they probably have plenty of projects that can benefit from what you do, even from a
Yeah.
marketing standpoint. Like, just, hey guys, we're trying to do the right thing here, and being able to back it
Mm.
up with, hey, we have this scientist doing this, which is what
Mm.
Inch is doing. I was checking it out.
Yep.
They speak about this.
Yeah. So to
Sorry.
the framework. So we have user, environment, interaction, and time.
Okay.
So the user is quite natural. So it's about how the user creates their profile, what is the interaction that they have with the system while doing that. Secondly is the environment. So how does everything look like? What does the application communicate to the
The Pornhub
user?
example of earlier.
Hmm?
The Pornhub example of earlier.
Pornhub, or the positive one is what you mentioned about the Bumble and the profiles and having that story.
Hmm.
Then the third one is the interaction. So that goes forward to the user to user. So the first two are user system relationships. And then you have the third one, which is the user to user interaction. So what do you enable? What do you enable for people to communicate? How do they communicate? And then the fourth one is time. So making sure that the person doesn't go into that market kind of syndrome, or there are so many people, but to ensure that they actually stay in that interaction and provide some sort of time for the intimacy to build. And so there are the four areas. And then each area also captures concerns that have been raised through research, but also requirements for needs to be satisfied in those areas. And it's a framework that doesn't just guide designers for these areas, but it also supports them in both brainstorming, and it supports them in creation of designs, and it supports them in evaluation of designs. Basically, it introduces them to all of these areas. They can literally go and use this framework to design the ideas from start to the end, but also to have a quick brainstorm, because I collected questions from the research that both users had, but some of them that were raised through secondary research, some that were raised from my own research. So like brainstorming questions, evaluation questions, and it provides with research collected ideas of 45 interaction examples that basically solve these concerns. So they can be like, oh, this idea is really good, we want to implement into the design. How can we actually tailor it for ourselves?
It sounds that it's something you could do not only with dating, but with plenty of other interaction apps.
Yeah.
And the time bit, which is, okay, how can you slow down time like a little bit
Yeah.
and put people in a container that they can't really come in and escape so quickly? It goes really well with the thing we were talking about earlier, which is helping people filter through values or whatever, so that the set you're given is the right set. Because if you're stuck with people for 2 weeks and they're not the right people, it's awful. And are you aware of the ability weighted decision making process? Have you heard about it?
No.
Believability. So that's something that I find amazing. So Redalio started I think it's a hedge fund. He's an investor. He's been very successful, and one of the ways he's been decentralizing power, so not him deciding, but the whole team, and empowering every person in the team to decide, is created a system so that you can rate people in meetings and in any interaction on how well they do in each decision, basically. So if you're in a meeting, you speak up and you say something amazing, then I rate you. So Petra did this, was really good. So she showed, I don't know, leadership in data analytics, whatever. And then it accumulates into a profile. And so next time we have a data analytics question, if you have a track record in data analytics, then you will be having higher decision power in the next decision, basically. And he has a software to manage this inside the company, and he's tried to put this on Zoom. I don't know if the software that works now, but I'm not in an organization, so I can't really test it. But it made me think that
this thing you were saying, as I start unfriending you or blocking you or whatever,
Mm,
and then I give a reason, then it creates kind of a track record for each person.
yeah.
And then that helps you not only say user generated content, but actually
Mhm,
the system saying this is true and this is not so true. So the values it speaks about are not really true.
mhm.
And yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of ideas already out there, and this is why I wanted to congregate them together because believe it or not, there is so much research that comes from psychology, so much research when it comes to dating apps and also cognition, perception and different things, but there is literally nothing when it comes to dating apps.
How,
Like it's
so why do you think they're not financing it?
I'm not saying just financing it because no one is financing me. I mean, my university is. Like dating apps are not financing me. And I don't know why.
It's
I
trivial. Maybe people think it's just trivial. It's not
I
really important.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's also this also falls down into the way that research operates in different places. And you have in some countries where research is funded by the government. So that also comes to think about what does the government find interesting. Like I remember when I was leaving the Netherlands, there was so much research that went into AI, and I was like, AI, and where's the rest? Where's everything else that should be funded? I think probably one of the other reasons why people didn't do it is also possibly political. Not everyone feels comfortable going and saying to the big industries, "Oh yeah, this is not ethical or what you're doing is wrong." So they're like, "Let me go and maybe research something." It's also like, why do people do research? Do they do research because they want to, after that, ask for a couple of more zeros on their bank account? Or are they doing it because they are really interested and they want to do research for the sake of people, not research for the sake of research or
Yeah.
research for the sake of industry?
If it's the case, I think it's short-sighted, because what you do, even if it comes from a heart, like even if it comes from the right behavior and trying to get to an ideal that currently goes against the system, so goes against
Mm,
financial interest, at the end of the day, if you align with well-being, people will
mm,
move to those apps. So short
yeah.
term, it might be a problem, but you create a disruption that will help whoever is going to implement
Mm,
those advice to do the
yeah.
right thing and get more clients.
Exactly, exactly. I'm sure, for example, you and I, if we don't trust the system, we're really going to feel it and we're going to consciously not go towards it. But maybe other people will subconsciously not go towards it and they won't understand why. They would just be like, I don't feel like
Yeah,
it. There's something in my gut that I don't feel like it. And it makes me really fascinated. And I think a lot of people also find the well being as a risky choice of action because it doesn't maybe show you the guarantee like, oh yeah, this is proven. If we provide a product, we get it out there, product will attract and we're going to get money. And thinking about well-being and phrasing it, it's when I say people being, they're like, what do you mean? What does that mean? So
mm,
it's very like soft. You can't easily describe it. You can't easily pinpoint it. And then it also gives you like this millions of ways. Oh, we have to now figure out how to actually phrase that, how to do that, how so I think for a lot of people, it's very ambiguous.
but I feel so. It's an interesting. I would like to stay there. Do you want to move? You want to go for a break?
I actually, yeah, maybe I will go for it
Okay, good.
later.
Let's do that. And we're back. So basically, what came to me was something I struggle with as well. I feel like well-being means everything and nothing to people. It's like spiritual. And it's also, it can trigger people. Like
Mm,
spirituality or religion, it's the words that like you need to explain what you mean by them. And I think it goes back to the conversation earlier we were having about what people need. And so you can discover what they need, and then well-being makes sense to them. It's okay, what are you trying to do in your life? I'm
mm,
trying to be more healthy. What does it mean to you? So I want to eat better because I have gut, I don't know, gut inflammations, or I
mm,
move not enough, so my body is actually very sore, whatever it
mm.
is. And then being makes sense because then it's not a general concept. It's okay, I need X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah.
so I struggle with it a lot because when I do retreats, it's well-being and creativity. And for well-being is like, and creativity means nothing as well to them unless they
Mhm,
think, oh, I have this project. For instance, you have your
mhm,
thesis. What if I say, hey, you can come with us and we spend 10 days together and you accelerate your thesis. You will have the right atmosphere to be more creative and work longer in a beautiful state, and you will be able to rest, whatever. And so if I put it into your life thinking about your thesis, it makes great sense. And you're like, wow, that's cool. But if I just speak about creativity and being, okay, it comes in one here, it goes in the other one, as my parents would say. So I think it's about taking enough time to go into people's intentions. And it's almost as don't pitch or don't speak until you know what people need. And then you're like, okay, I can link into X, Y, and Z. But being specific enough, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think now when you were also talking about it, what came to my mind is if you, let's say that the app or the product or a service doesn't even want to say we focus on well-being. But for me, well-being is almost anything but harm. Because let's say if I use a product and I feel bad while using the product, my personal well-being is going low. But if I, for example, as a product or as a service or as a system, allow for the person to feel good, that's already good. But if I allow them to flourish and if I allow them to develop, then that person is also going to create a relationship with that product or system or something, and they're going to continue to use it. So I think like you don't even need to necessarily go and say, oh, I'm allowing for your well-being. Of course, they will allow you a certain target, but if you actually enable for the user to realize while using the product, the service, or the system that their well-being is better, you actually create a connection and you create probably a faithful client or a user that is probably also going to say to other people about that. To give you very plainly, like a very maybe stupid example, but my friends were making fun of me how I'm a biggest consultant for a Tesco club card because I love a Tesco club card. So Tesco is like the shop in the UK, and they have this club card which allows for, and it's free to be a user, and it always gives you on discount something, and they don't make this crazy commercials about it. You have here and there, but they don't say, oh, we allow our customer to save this and this amount of money in a week. They don't go and do that. But if I look at the end of the month, like I really save a lot of money because of that club card. And my well-being is so much better. There was a time when I lived quite further away from Tesco and I really felt it. I felt like I was shopping in another shop, never, no discount, no nothing. And I just realized they didn't make this out there, but I just think about how many people probably feel so much better just by going there and knowing that they can save so much money just if they, because they have on the discount always example of almost any kind of purchase. For example, if you say, oh, I want to buy on sale some fruit, and the lower price is going to be for like 5 to 10 types of fruit. Or if you say, I want to buy milk, there's always going to be a milk that is for the club card price. And I love it because it allows you the choice and allows you the freedom to also actually save, especially at this time when the economic crisis and it's hitting UK a lot. So it's not like they don't go and they don't say, oh, we're doing this, we're doing, like, you don't have to go and say, we're focusing on your well-being. You're going to feel so good because of this, because we find it important. Just create that interaction and then see what's going to happen if you allow for a person to feel good. But also, even more than that, if a product creates a relationship for the user with themselves, like if they get to understand themselves better and grow, you're going to have a really good and faithful customer.
Yeah. No, I guess my struggle is that I'm only about well-being and creativity. I don't have a lot beyond this, so I need to talk about it. But yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Cool. So maybe let's switch to taboo and get into the depth of it. How do you define taboo? What does it mean?
So a taboo can be a person, an object, an action, a place, or a situation, so historic or present, that will create a certain reaction from the society or from a person because it's not societally accepted, or there's a certain perception of being um, related in a way to that person, action, object, situation, or historic situation. Yeah, so there's a certain level of societal sort of disapproval, but also a certain negative, of course, perception to it.
Okay. I was just checking Google. Prohibited or restrictive by social custom
Yeah,
as
social
an
custom.
adjective, and then as a noun, it's a social or religious custom prohibiting or restricting a particular practice or forbidding association with a particular person, place, or thing.
Mhm.
And so it can be a taboo it can be a taboo for only one person, I guess. It
Mhm.
doesn't need to be societal, and it can be a taboo
Yeah.
in a family. It can be a taboo
Yeah.
nested eggs, let's say.
Yeah. If you are, let's say, an albino person, like an albino person in certain places of the world are seen as childs of demons or bad luck. So if you're an albino person, you are a taboo. Your existence is a taboo. Yeah.
Okay.
Or if you're doing something, so for example, let's say if you are speaking about any sort of genocide in a place where it has happened, mentioning that or that topic is also taboo. I remember I was in Graz and I was a kid, and Hitler, I think he was born in Graz. And I was a kid and I was like in the middle of the street, like to my dad, is Hitler from here? And my dad was like, Petra, shut up. I was like, why? And he was like, you can't speak about Hitler in Graz. And I saw just like people turning around. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know. Yeah, so the reason why I don't really use like the ones, because they say, of course, it's a social custom, but they always say like about associated with something, but taboos are not just, they're not a topic. They manifest in many in the ways, as I mentioned, the person, you have the action, you have an object, a place, such as, I don't know, the strip club, or in some countries, the casino can also be a taboo, and the historic situation or a situation.
I had no clue Hitler was born in Graz. Thank you for the info. I had no clue. Okay. And so there's something interesting with taboo is that when you talk about them with someone, it's a sign of deep trust and going beyond the accepted paradigm, let's say. So it's quite interesting that it's as much a division or a barrier as it can be a gathering artifact, let's say.
Yeah, I think definitely is like people don't, from my experience, everyone wants to talk about taboo. Everyone wants to talk about some sort of a taboo. And I always find it interesting because I always know what people find important based on what taboo they start talking about, or what they find that they have a certain relationship, maybe not, maybe a relationship that they want to change with a certain taboo. But I think that definitely, even with someone's best friend, they maybe don't speak about some sort of taboos, because you're talking about taboo topics is not necessarily on who you are, it's about who you are with in that moment. So I remember last year I did a seminar at this university, and it was an online seminar, and I said immediately, I said, guys, we're going to feel uncomfortable, but also see it as a playground. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. This is a free space. And I was really shocked. I felt really touched, because even within the first hour, people opened up really like deep stuff and personal stuff, because that deep stuff or personal stuff is connected to some sort of a taboo, because your certain trauma is maybe a taboo for you, but it's often, for example, if I said, oh yeah, I had a really hard time, I broke my bone, I broke my back, It's a painful thing for me, but it's not a taboo to talk about it. So that will require a certain level of trust for me, or vulnerability, or my capability of being vulnerable to share that with you. But if my certain trauma is something that is a taboo, it's going to be even harder to say. And that has nothing to do with maybe with my vulnerability, but has everything to do with the society or the context that I'm in. I heard this quote from Viola Davis, and she was mentioning how it was easier for her to say that she was raped, because rape was a conversation that has been happening. But for the first time in her life, she publicly opened that she did an abortion, because an abortion was even more of a taboo in the society. And she recently did it in her book. And so she was saying how she was shocked that she wasn't feeling able to say to the public that she did an abortion because of what of a taboo it is. But of course, like, abortion is not an easy thing to do, but I would think that it's definitely easier to do than, being raped. If we have conversations, or if we have people around who speak about their experiences of rape and being victims of rape, and the fact that she didn't feel comfortable to say about the abortion because she was afraid that she was going to be more criticized about doing that, I found that extremely fascinating. I was really like, oh wow, how sharing certain information, what are the requirements to do that?
So the question is, where is the friction? Is it on you personally? So I don't want to talk about my weaknesses or what I did wrong. This could be a personal taboo. Even if society doesn't mind, I can speak about this. But the friction is on me, or the friction is on the society, which is what you talked about, abortion, for instance. And it can be on both, and then it's extremely hard to talk about the taboo.
Yeah, it's a society for sure. Because, for example, if you think about certain things, certain taboos, for you to be talking about or associating with them, in some countries, it can literally lead you to jail. You know what I mean? So, for example, you probably wouldn't be shocked if you saw people doing PDA. So PDA is a certain level of, it's not a taboo, but it definitely gives you some sort of societal like look, like, oh my God, that people are really getting at it, like making out. I don't know.
What is PDA?
Public
Personal display. Okay,
public
sorry.
displays of affection, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you, for example, if you do that, let's say, I don't know, somewhere in Paris, like, people are like, oh, okay, fine, don't look at them, but the people are having a good time. And if you do that,
Well,
I don't know.
it depends how far you go into your PDA.
Sorry?
It depends how far you go in your PDA.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
it's a soft one or
yeah.
not a soft one.
First base, second base.
Yeah.
If you do it, let's say, in Saudi, like, you
Yeah.
can't do that. It's literally not legal to do that. And so, yeah, so it really depends on the context, of course, where you are. And so also another thing, like how taboos are defined, and this is from a book, is that it will bring to you a certain level of penalty. Now, that penalty can be very different. It can be just looks of people, or it can be some sort of disapproval of people, that it will change the way that they react to you in the future. Or it can mean you can get fired. So it can be political ones, or it can be being expelled from a certain religious group, or it can be changing of some sort of relationship. So it can have different consequences: societal, emotional, financial, relational. So getting on the border with interacting with taboos, be that in a very public way or just in speaking about it, people inhibit themselves because they know that there's going to be a certain level of consequence. Now comes down to, are you fine with having that consequence? Are you not fine having that consequence? And yeah, and it's really difficult, because if you do that, you always also have to think about, will I be okay with what is the result of that consequence? Am I going to be fine? Am I going to be emotionally okay? Or am I going to be physically okay with what happens? So, yeah.
Interesting. Wait, this question that is next is grounded into what's happening this week. A friend of mine got fired for speaking up, and I had a long conversation with her afterwards, and actually while she was talking with the company and the execs. To me, I was seeing her as a courageous person. So she was going very strong, and she could have gone more soft and trying her way. But sometimes going soft doesn't go anywhere. So you need to go and escalate a little bit. But I think there's, as you said, the most important things usually come with taboos. And especially, we were talking about earlier the fact that, for instance, for dating apps, the tomorrow's dating app is a threat to today's. And it means it's a threat to some executives in those companies who want to maintain the status quo, etc., or some interest groups. And to me, if I look at transformation of organizations, there is the ideal state that they want to get to, and there's today. And to get from today to the ideal state, some people are going to lose their job, or there will be reorganization. So things are not going to be perfect for everyone, right? It's always some people will win, some people will lose, and some people will try to stick things, keep it stuck, because that's the best outcome for them personally, not for the organization, for them. And so that's what I feel happened for her. She was trying to go against some people that are trying to maintain a status quo that is not good for the organization, but good for them. And she got fired. And I feel that almost every executive would benefit from looking at their organization from a taboo standpoint, just like we do from a personal standpoint as well. What is it that I'm not being told, or what is it that I'm being told that I don't listen to? And so the question, it's a bit of a long question, but how do you think is the best way to handle taboo and bring it up in a relationship, bring it up in a company, in a group of people, so that it can be a trigger for a cool dynamic afterwards? That will, and how do you create a safe space as well so that it doesn't go out of control?
I think it's really, it's an important question. And I think I was even telling you definitely about the importance and like of a taboo to actually address them, because when we were speaking earlier, like for me personally, taboos are literally, how do you say, like signposts. Like, this is something that you need to work on in order to progress, or this is something that it's an issue for you in order to progress. Working on taboos is hard and it's emotionally taxing, and because you are going something against your, because we all come from a society, right? So we are born into a society, we learn the values, we learn the beliefs, you learn protocols for a society. So working on taboos literally means going against the current, unless you are born in a very specific environment where your parents are forward thinking. So then that is normal for you. But if, let's say, you are born in a traditional space, working on taboos is literally you operating against your wheels in you and what you were told. And that is exhausting. Like, that can be exhausting. I can see also from my personal experience with people who have been in an activism world and they operate in that, those people are tired, they're exhausted, they have potentially mental health issues, they have a lot of anger. So I also think we have to remind ourselves that we are human and that it's okay sometimes to put the pause on it and to be like, you know what, I'm gonna turn a blind eye on this today for the sake of my health. So I just want to make that clear, that I also don't think it's healthy for an organization to be continuously like searching for that thing. Sometimes just let yourself be. Like the first thing that I always say, like when you work on a taboo, you have to tell to everyone, like you have to put that mask down. Okay, today I'm not a manager, today I'm not a boss. Like, guys, this is going to be hard. We're going to be uncomfortable, but let's promise to each and every one of us, this is a safe space in whatever we discuss today. So I think it's also really important to point down some sort of a ground rules. It can literally be like a single A4 paper and saying, this is what we're going to do today. Nothing that is said here is going to go forward. We don't even, you can even do such a thing as write a name tag in a different name. So to help the mind to disassociate with who you are and with your role, and you come here just as yourself, as a human.
Did you do the name tag change? Have you tried it?
I'm probably gonna do that. I have a project coming up, so that's why it came up to me, and I was like, okay, let's
That's a
test
cool
it.
idea.
Let's test it.
To take
Yeah,
notes on different names. I love it.
yeah.
And then keep a track of which name.
I have a secret data for you.
Oh my god.
Yeah. But just to say, and then, okay, does everyone agree with this? Would someone add to this? Are you fine with this? Just like you need to, as you said, you need to set the scene, but you need to set the scene where people also feel that they have a control. And I always say, you are free to go in whatever moment you want. This is not a place where we want to push you to be. You gotta feel safe. So take the break. And then also, what I do is I always think about what are all the possible senses that are involved and how can I relax them. For example, I put the music on, I put a very incense stick, and I remember in the last session that I held, I was like thinking, oh my God, because not everyone likes incense sticks. And then a guy came and he was like, Petra, the incense stick is gone. It's not working anymore. You need to put a new one. I was like, oh, they noticed. So I found it very interesting. And then, of course, it's again coming to the color. So, what is the color that you're exposing them? Can you also expose people to certain things? So, that is like for setting the ground, like the environment. And then I always of course, you have to give guidelines. So, I always say if an uncomfortable moment comes, listen. And if someone like gets to be in a certain way, just you can agree to disagree, but don't go and try to push your thoughts. Just try to understand. Instead of disagreeing, try to ask as many questions so you can understand where this person comes from to that pose. But I always also try to put people back to what you mentioned about what are the truths, what is the human in us. So I always try to also place people in a very like vague kind of taboo environment for them to also understand that, okay, one thing that is a taboo for you may not be for another person, but that person is probably feeling the same feelings as you are based on that other taboo. So that is something that you share.
Okay,
And
so if I don't share the problem with the belief, at least the emotional response to the taboo is there as well, so we can share that.
yes, exactly. And the final thing is I try to also address the taboo in a very different way in three different stages. So one is understanding and knowledge. So to dissect taboos and understand, okay, where is it placed? How does that influence me? And what are the effects of that taboo? Because a lot of people are not even aware that something is a taboo for them until they actually face it. So to give you just a bit of a background on that, how I actually started working on taboos was I was on Facebook and I was scrolling down the Facebook wall and I came across this one post where a girl was saying how it took her months actually to find supervisors for her master degree on stigma of menstruation in media, and she was in Germany. And I was like, it took you months? Because all of the supervisors found it to be controversial, that they want to work on it, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, in Germany, that it's a taboo? Are you kidding me? And then, like, this glass shattering, I was like, oh my God, menstruation is a taboo. I had no clue. I was just functioning. I was going like month to month, buying my pads. And then I started to realize, oh my God, like I started to think how it influenced me in my work and my relationships, and how was in my family, how was the situation in my family. And I was like, I was blown. And I thought, oh my God, I really need to work more on this. So that's how I actually started. Like, I first took it to an elective course. And then in the elective course, I dissected it for 6 weeks. And then I took it into my thesis. So I ended up actually working on it for an entire year because I was just like, oh my God. And every month I would understand how it influenced me in another way. So that is the thing. Like, we know that we shouldn't be speaking about it, but
So what is the genesis of taboos? Because it seems that it comes from having a hard time to communicate properly about it. But it's like walking on eggshells. And so because it's so hard to talk about something, without risking hurting other people or without making stupid mistakes or whatever it is.
Mm.
We just stop doing it, and then it
Yeah.
becomes it's just because we stop doing it, then it becomes bigger than what it should be.
Yeah. So you mean what is the origin of taboos?
How does a taboo form?
It's formed in history. The word taboo actually is it's in the West. It's very young. So it came to the West.
I'm interested in the answer, but that's not my question. Huh? I'm not interested,
Ah,
but it's good. I'm interested in the answer. But
okay.
I was asking you another question, so I'll
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
after.
yeah. I will tell you because it's all connected. It's all
Okay.
connected. So the word taboo, it started from 1780s when Captain James Cook was traveling in Polynesia, and then he saw the word taboo over there and how they were using it. And it actually, in its origin, it means marked and sacred because it was actually connected to certain behaviors that are prescribed by a religion. So that was like it would be like marked in front of going into a church or into a temple. And there were certain these behaviors and he was really fascinated by it. And so he was like, oh my God, how is this word taboo that they're continuously using? They were using for something that you shouldn't do. And then he took it to the West, and that was the Victorian era in the in
Why was it useful for the Polynesians to use taboos? Why was it good for them? Or was it good
because
for them?
it was creating certain behaviors and certain rituals and systems in the society that was connected to religion. So
Like just as an example,
yeah,
if, for instance, criticizing, let's say that we are taking the Catholic
mhm,
religion and the Catholic Church, you can think anything you want, but you're not going to speak up your doubts about the Holy Trinity or the Virgin Mary in
yeah,
the middle of the Mass. This is not the place
yeah,
for it. And so the taboo would be, okay, you can think and reflect
mm,
outside, but inside the church, please focus on your faith because that would be more
yeah.
useful for you and the community. Something like this?
So they, from what I understand, is that they didn't necessarily have that it can be spoken about. It was just like this shouldn't be.
Hmm.
And the taboo for them is an adjective. It's not, so it's something. It's
Taboo.
like something, but it's not like a thing. So it's not a noun.
Okay.
And the reason why it's important to also to understand is because when it came to the West, it was the Victorian era. So it was the Victorian era, which means that if something wasn't understood or couldn't be explained by science, it was either magic or it was a taboo. And in that time, because it couldn't be explained, and because if something was magic, because everything had to be explained by science or everything had to be explained by religion. And if you weren't able to do that, then it was a taboo or magic, and you don't want to be connected to magic. So that is why that behavior of, oh, let's not speak about it because there's a certain threat, because we can't explain it, it went into silence. And of course, religion, because every religion, for example, uh, besides Buddhism, does not like menstruation. Of course, that's why associating with menstruation or putting it out, literally until a year or two ago, we didn't have blood on ads of menstrual pads, is because you are literally trying to remove centuries of something, how things were operating and how it was told to you by the and before as well. If you think about the highest forces or the highest regulating forces were the kings and the church. Of course, you have to also think about, oh, we are trying to remove from ourselves something that is literally in our DNA, it's in our society, it's in our history, that tells us we can't associate with this.
But you can read it as societal pressure on. I don't know why they would do that, but let's just say that it's the pressure from society trying to hide that part of women. But you can also look at it from the point of view of women trying to protect themselves, because when they speak about
Mm.
menstruation, then they ostracize for those days they don't have the right mood, and then, oh yeah, don't listen to her, she has her period.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
dismissing people because of the state they're going through because at the end of the day, there's a bigger taboo, which is we don't accept our bodies and we don't accept the natural cycles. So instead of addressing them, we just do this kind of stupid things.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the taboo was born from society or from women trying to hide this part because it's harder to integrate during some days of the month, and you stop being, you can be isolated, at least during this time. And I think it reminds me so I was listening to a shaman, an ayahuasca shaman actually, and he was telling the story about the fact that women, when they had menstruation in the Amazonian region he was from, they would not be isolated, but they would isolate themselves, stop cooking, stop doing everything, not to put the energy in the food. And so that was not a negative way of doing it, but I can see that if it's it's like culturally it's accepted there to do this. But if you were to put people, you can't work because you have your period and it's not chosen by you. So that's where I don't know when it happened, but
yeah, so it is hard I would actually argue that today, because, okay, let's go time-wise. For example, what you mentioned about the Amazon, actually, what I found really fascinating is that when you check the Vedas, so the ancient Vedas in Hinduism, it says that the reason why women should remove themselves from the society is because they're going through, and there's a word for this, which I don't know, I forgot, that they're going through the state, which is almost godlike. So they're going through this purity. And the reason why, for example, women are told not to go to temples in the Vedas, it doesn't say you can't go. It says you shouldn't go because you are already godly, and men are going into the temples to purify themselves to come to your state. And so then comes exactly. And so the reason why they shouldn't touch the pickle or something, there's like this, one of the things, like you shouldn't touch the pickle when you're on your period. The reason is because you're going through this pure energy and pure state that others should take care of you. So you shouldn't be. And removing
it's like they should serve you. You should not be serving
Yeah.
people. You should basically be there, and usually if you're cooking, you're seen as there. Okay.
Yes. And so you have that. And the reason also why they say you should remove yourself is because they compare it to meditation. So they compare it to this like inner, like seeing what your body tells you to do, seeing what comes. And I find
let me just add one thing, because otherwise it's too restrictive to operations. And also it was negative, but he did say that it was 3 days. One day was about themselves, so contemplating, like kind of a meditation about themselves, and the other or purification of themselves. Second day was about their family, and third day was about the community. So there was this work, this inner work that was happening for the 3 days.
That's really cool. I find it really beautiful. I think we should just do it. Men and women should do it.
Yeah.
But the thing is also why it's important to think about the context is because if you look at how the hierarchy in the Hinduist countries are, you have a hierarchy, how the system works. So for example, when I was doing my research and I spoke to different women, and they would say how and we're talking about women who are very powerful, they moved countries, they're doing their work, they're super successful. And I asked them, so what are your practices? What do you do? And then they say, oh, we don't go to the temples. And I asked them, why? And they said, because we were told so. And you, in a certain country, like in a certain context, the thing was the Vedas said this. And now you have this system that was taken from the Vedas, which are like ancient scripts. They were taken.
And you lose the why. You lose the why.
You lose the why because no one says you should do this because of this, or it's because of this. They just say practices. This is what we do. This is what we do. And you can't go. Of course you can, but it's really hard. It's not a system that it's, if you question, why do I need to do that? Do you know why? Do you know? No one asks. They're just like, this is what we're supposed to do, because obedience in a family is seen as a good thing, not questioning your adults. And even, for example, I heard also a number of people saying to me, my mom told me that she doesn't like it, but the grandma wants it, so let's keep grandma happy. So
or grass Hitler. Is it shame? Is it the fact that they didn't want to support him, so they were like, we will never say his name again? but they could have said, no, let's not say his name. He doesn't deserve it. And then after 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, like, wow, we don't really know anymore why we're doing it, but let's not do it anymore. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So you also have a lot of these.
Are you trying to do like rock stars? Every 5 minutes you change the clothes?
They're like, I have a third one. No, this is. I thought because of the mic, actually.
Cool. No, it's cool. It's funny.
Yeah. So I think you have a lot of these things. But going back to what you said about today, I think it's also important to think about the working systems and the industry. It was constructed by men. Women were in some positions, but there's also a lot of, even if we think about when did women start to be able to vote in some countries, like we're talking about not even one life of a person, like it's a couple of decades ago. And also, which is maybe an interesting fact to actually think about how the relationship towards menstruation was going in the last 100 years. And this is the US bit. So, for example, they were saying how in 80s, I think there was the first woman who was allowed to go into the school. And the reason was because they said that women, due to menstruation, cannot focus. So that's why they didn't allow women. And then what happened when the First World War came, they said how no, women can actually work while
because
menstruating.
they needed them too. Yeah.
Because they needed them. And then after the First World War was done, they were like, again, like studies show that actually women cannot focus. Then the World War II happened again. So the same story. And then when the factory was being made, because one of the ways that the US got recovered after the Second World War was through the construction of big factories. Before the factories were happened, they were like, you know what? No, actually, it was studies showed that women should stay at home and the best, etc., etc. And then when the factories came about and they actually needed workers, no, they actually had. So the menstruation, even as what we know in the society, is a lot as well to do with the political, and is a lot to do with societal demands, or how.
It's a way for them. It's based on what you say. So it's a way for men to control. It's a good argument for men to say they can't do it because in those days, and so let's just forget about it.
Yeah, and what is really interesting is actually that there is a study that was done in Australia when they were actually following the hormonal balance of both menstruating and non-menstruating people, and they actually saw that the hormonals, like the hormones, are going the same, but the only thing is that a woman can predict how her balance is going to be based on her cycle. For men, we don't know. And so I think there's also.
Are you trying to say that we are a non-quantity, so we should stop working?
We should all just chill and do vipassana.
Love it.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that definitely it's really complex. And I also find it really interesting in my studies, like when I found like how women have their relationship with menstruation, there is a lot of disgust, and there is a lot of shame, and there is a lot of this need to hide, and some sort of personal exclusion, which is, I don't think it's just based on the personal need to chill. It's based on a lot about what is going to happen, how is it going to happen, and etc. And also how are others going to react? How are others going to, especially like in romantic relationships? For me, I think one of the biggest things when I questioned men about menstruation, the only thing that they said was like, oh yeah, of course we want to support our partners, but we often don't know how, because there is not discussed about the way to have a conversation around it. We don't want to interfere because some women don't share their experiences with their partners because they don't know actually, do they want to know? Because they have this perception of, oh, this is something that is disgusting. Or
I'm not going to be trusted because they're going to think I'm just emotional, and so I will lose power in the relationship for a few days.
Or they're going to tell me that is that time of the month or this and that. But
it feels like what I was trying to say earlier, and I think at the end you responded to the question with an example basically. But it feels that it's when we have an incapacity to use language to deal with something because we don't know enough about it, or there are power plays, or different things. And so it would require a long conversation with a lot of care, taking care of every word to be able to do it properly. And because this is such a difficult thing, we just decided to, okay, just let's not talk about it. It's just
Yeah, going back to that, because I think this is something that's probably the most useful to people, is I think there are three elements, like when you have a conversation about taboos. One is to acknowledge that it's not easy, that it's not going to be comfortable. So that is like the first thing. That is like making the ground, let's put it that way. And then the second thing is to say, it's fine to say, I don't know. It's literally fine to say, I don't know how I want to say this. I don't know how to express this. But use the I sentences. Don't say, oh, you did this, you did that. I feel this and this way about this. And I would like to feel this and this way about this. So go and like mention, use the I sentences, because often we say like you or we sentences, which is accusatory, but more than that, they're not important. It's not important. What is important is how you feel, how someone's action made you feel, what did you feel about that, and also how do you want to feel. And so the third element is a way forward. So decide with this person, with the organization, what are the next steps that you're going to do to ensure that problem or that situation that you raise is going to be solved, and decide how you're going to do that. And what you can also have an added thing is that you can decide on, in a month's time, in a 2-month time, we're going to come back and reevaluate. We're going to come back and think about, is this problem solved? Do we want to change it? And how does that feel? But I think the first thing, just acknowledging, often saying just, I am uncomfortable about this, removes the discomfort. It's already, it makes you feel easier. It removes that stress. It removes that burden. And it provides you with the ability to actually decide, how do I want to go forward about this?
the second point about
the autonomy.
Sorry, yeah. The second point about feeling is a bit difficult, because if you talk with business people or engineers who are more towards thinking and doing and performing and getting things done, I don't know. I don't know, but I feel and I would like to feel is not going to be a sentence I can use, at least myself. I would need to do some education process so that feeling is important. How would you do it with people who are less, they don't value as much, just like to them it's not more value, it's not so much value, because it's all about logic and processes and systems. What would you say for the second step for people who are less open to feeling?
I think, of course, then you hire a person who does that. These are three things. And if you're with a person who is your partner and who you have a good relationship with, this can be done in 5 to 10 minutes. But if you have an organization, of course, you can't just go and be to your team. Oh yeah, tell me. That's an entire scene that is set. You design, like what I was mentioning earlier was like the 3 games that I do. So this is an hour workshop. That is, or it can take also 2 hours or 3 hours. But of course, you need to modulate in a certain way. And so you also need to build that. You need to build that knowledge. You need to build that setting. So for the people to be calm. Also, like often what I really like to do is what you were talking about, the body. I like to do something with the body just to a bit shake them up, because we do have tension in our points. And just for that to be shaken a bit already provides a certain, it provides a certain energy. So yeah, definitely, like when I was mentioning about the knowledge about the thing, then the second thing is also for people need to laugh. There's a lot in taboos which also holds uncomfortable conversations, but it comes to that like a bit of a trigger for people to actually be talking about it, because they know it's a taboo. And when you start laughing, you actually remove that barrier, and it's almost like that wall goes down, and then you're able to talk about it. And you do need a bit of that moment of revelation. And especially, this is insane for me, because if you actually think about all of those uncomfortable things, and this studies as well show that, are actually leverage for you to build trust. People trust you if you're a human. People trust you if you are able to show that you're uncomfortable, that you're vulnerable. That's one thing. Second thing is putting people together actually to go for an uncomfortable situation gets them together. It builds a rapport. So for me, it's also another thing is when in a lot of organizations, of course, and I fully understand that, they don't want to put themselves sometimes in these situations because you never know how a different person is going to perceive it, how they're going to find it triggering, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you actually stop and think about, oh, wow, I have the opportunity here to get my people together, to trust each other, and imagine what that can actually do for their productivity, for their satisfaction at work, for their well-being at work. But to actually reframe that from, oh, this is uncomfortable and this is something that we shouldn't do, as actually a possible leverage really does a lot.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Would you say that a healthy, like the amount of taboo there is inversely correlated to the health of the organization or the couple? So the more the more landmines you have, the more it's a sign you need to do something about it.
I don't know. I was actually speaking about this with a friend of mine, how if you don't have taboos in your organization, that means it's actually very, huh?
It's unsaid taboos, so it's even worse. They're not uncovered.
Maybe not, but what I meant was they come from, it's very heteronormative, because or homogenous. So if the minute that you have diversity, you're going to have taboos.
Mm.
So if you actually think about, oh, we don't have taboos, maybe those are some taboos that you decided or you created a relationship with your partner around them. But if you're an organization that doesn't have taboos, that means that probably you're not diverse, because the minute that you put diversity in, the minute that you put different religions, different cultures, and then you build a relationship with the people around that. But if you have no taboos, then I'm like, you probably don't have diversity in it.
Yeah, I think that's one way of saying it. The other way I see it is as soon as you make a mistake, either you share it or it's not shared, so it becomes a taboo, right? It accumulates as something of like part of the things you're not really proud of. Also, you've made mistakes all your life. You can't have been verifying all the things. So I can't believe that maybe it's not an organizational taboo, but at least at the level of every person, I'd be surprised if they can say everything about everything they've done in their lives. There's always so there's taboo always. It's just that it's hidden.
But that's also the thing, like the goal is not for you to come and say to your colleague, oh man, you know what? I had a massive diarrhea today. You're not gonna, and you don't have to, but the point is like that you can, if it's really a problem. The point is to create a culture where you know that you can say things if you feel that you need to do it. And I think that's the goal for any company. And I think also the state of the market currently is also in that way, that it's a really big, like data shows and surveys show, like, and there are different ones, but from what I gathered is from 45 to about 70% of reason why people leave a certain company is the company culture or the toxic company culture. And 30% to 40% the reason why people stay is the company culture. And of course, being able to speak about taboos or how the company relates to sensitive topics is a no-brainer. It falls under a company culture. So for you, not delving into sensitive issues that probably bothers your colleagues or your staff is actually quite of an expensive thing not to do.
Okay. How do you speak about what you do to companies?
Yeah, I say to them like that it's like it always goes as a story, but I always say, can you imagine getting into a conference room and that someone says without an issue, oh yeah, guys, I'm currently having an anxiety attack. They won't. They will maybe try to find an excuse to leave the room. Or how many people do you know in this room that maybe had possible cancer threats, or a partner who is going through cancer, or like these tough issues? And the fact is that we are not like, we don't operate in roles. Like who you are 10 minutes before you enter your office room is still the same person who's in that office room as when you leave. And these things are some of the biggest things that influence our well-being in the world. Like, for example, WHO, they said that sanitation is the most unspoken, is still one of the biggest taboos because we don't speak about poop openly. And how can you think about if governing bodies cannot speak about something? How can they deal with that? How can
Yeah.
you deal in the company with issues if you don't speak about it? If you don't know what bothers your people, how do you know that they're good, that they're performing well? And the only thing that you see, oh, that person is not performing, and we're going to speak about it before the red alarm, instead of actually going and checking, guys, how are you? What's wrong? Do you want to pick up something?
Mm.
And one way, of course, to deal with it is, of course, to decide on policies and to create policies up front and then show it to people and say, okay, this is how we were thinking about dealing with this topic. Are you fine with that? Are you okay with that? I found last year in November, because it was a World Menopause Day, and there was a menopause policy in a company because they realized that their colleagues who were going through menopause weren't really feeling well. They were not operating the best. And they just discussed and they said, what would help you? What would help you to make that? And now another person knows that, oh, yeah, I don't have to go and tell them I'm going through menopause. I can just address that. I can speak to HR. And I think, of course, it all does like this sort of subconscious things to your staff to know, oh, yeah, my company thought about that. And they made it, and they found it important enough to actually make a policy about that.
Yeah. What do you need? And be open to anything instead of
Yeah.
just saying, okay, what do you need in your desk and your meetings? Yeah.
Yeah. We have a therapist in the building, so you can go to speak. And of course, that is a great thing. But I think also a lot of these companies do a checklist of stuff instead of actually going and speaking to their staff and saying, oh, guys, what do you feel? What do you need? And you don't have to even speak to us. We can get someone in who's impartial, who's going to talk to you about it. You tell them what you need. I was speaking 2 weeks ago with one guy who has been in HR for 30 years, 40 years even. And he said how he has seen so many times when companies literally wanted to almost force well-being onto their staff. And also forcing that is not the way to
Problem.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because then it actually, you do a contra effect.
When you were talking about things that we don't acknowledge in companies, what came to me was the burnout situation. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
had a good conversation with a long and beautiful conversation with someone who creates retreats for people who are burning out.
Mm,
And one of the things she said is that she's been trying to explain what she does to companies, to different HR, the top people in HR in different French companies. And everyone was like, we don't have burnout here. No one is burning out. That's okay. She's been doing this for a few years, so maybe things are getting better. But the first answers that she was getting is no burnout.
yeah.
And I did listen to some of the podcasts from people who've gone through our retreats, and
Mm,
they were burning out, but
mm,
they were actually never recognizing they were. So like, what few signs that I was not so well, but no one would say I have burnout or I'm in depression or I
mm,
feel really bad right now. I need like most of those things are like people would just speak about a few symptoms.
mm,
Sometimes they would recognize them as being a part of a bigger problem, sometimes not. But it's hard, it's rare because it's hard to recognize
mm,
that we are not well, because then you become isolated again, because then people want you to perform, right? So if you don't perform, what's going to happen?
mm,
And so basically the question that I have for you is, how can you help people deal with their own taboos? Because not
mm,
recognizing that I've burned out, like the way I sit now as me holding space, I
mm,
always try to recognize my shortcomings, and I don't feel ashamed, because what I felt all my life is like the more you open to people,
yeah.
the more like the better the space become, but also it's very liberating for yourself. Like there's no pressure anymore, I'm a person, I fuck up, and right now I'm not feeling so well, and my relationship is not perfect, and okay, what about, and then I pass the stick, and what about so for me, that I feel it's easier than trying to pretend that everything is okay.
Mm,
But when And I'm not saying that everything is perfect, because I'm not asking on a regular basis, what can I improve to my friends or to my wife? Okay, I need to do it more. So I know there's room for improvement. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but
Mm.
how do you deal with taboo at a personal level, not the organizational one? Because they need to work before on their own taboos and understanding them, like self-inquiry a bit, because before they can go to a group and deal with taboo as a group, though.
Mm. So just to make sure I understood it correct. So how do you help other people deal with their personal taboos, or how do you as a person deal with your personal taboos?
It's the same, because I guess you would teach them the
Okay, so how do I help other people to deal with their personal taboos? I think one thing is just to, from my experience, because also as a friend, I always want to be like, oh man, I have all of these resources for you, and I can give you this, and I can give you that, and we can speak about this, and we can. That really doesn't work. Like pushing it on other
Really?
people. No, because when people are ready, they will start
come.
searching for it. And when people feel ready to deal with certain things, they will start searching for it. So what I got to realize is that I just say, I have this space for you, and whatever questions you may have, it's possible to ask. So knowing that there is a space provided, and also you being the example. So when I started dealing, for example, with some of my personal taboos, like a few years ago, I was really had my personal concerns about sex, and then years before that was mental health. So currently it's a bit like about finances. And when other people see me like, oh, you're in this and you're thinking about this, they would be like, can we ask you something? Or just knowing that you provide that space to other people to have uncomfortable conversations, and that you're going to listen, that you're not going to be like pushing them, that you're going to be allowing for that discussion to be fluent. And I often also fall under that trap that I have all of this knowledge and data, and I just want to help a person. So I'm going to throw this entire bag of data onto that other person. But something I really want to stress is that when it comes to taboos, we fall under the transformative learning. So when you're speaking to people about taboos, you're not speaking to their current perception of taboos. You're speaking to the entire growing up and the entire livelihood and the learnings that they have adopted from their community, from their society, from their family, from their relationships. You're trying to reshape not just that current perception, you're trying to reshape that entire life that person had with that taboo, because taboos are societally structured, they're not just individually structured. So it falls under the transformative learning, which means that often it will follow a certain level of shock. And most importantly, is that when you deliver that to them, for example, whenever I go and create a project or create a intervention of any kind, I know that the result that I want to create in that person is not gonna be in that room. The result is gonna be a month or 2 months after that. So you have to also understand that when you are working on these things, it takes time, it takes a certain transition, and do not think that you're going to get the result with your people or with your partner, whoever that you want in that moment. And you have to be patient, and you cannot push. So it can be like, oh, I'm here when you want me. I'm here when you want to discuss about that. And then that person is going to come back to ask for a bit. Okay. And then they're going to leave. And then they're going to come back for a bit. And then they're going to leave again. And so, yeah, it's not something like, which is, of course, not ideal in the organizations when they're like, oh, our stats are still the same. And you're
Yeah,
like,
you were there on Thursday, we did the survey on Monday, and it's still not moving.
Exactly. So yes, I always like I deliver a survey, evaluation survey a month after. And it was really beautiful. Like it was really beautiful to see, because you don't just provide people with tools, you change them. Like I had one girl telling me It was in a course that I delivered, and she said, not just that I now have the tools, but you made me rethink my family relationships. You made me create a relationship with myself about different topics, because she realized that she had a relationship with religion, with money, with sex that she took from her family. And that is, for me, the most beautiful thing of working on taboos, is that you provide people the freedom and the autonomy to retake and recreate a relationship they want to have with different topics in their life. And all of these topics concern the biggest well-being, health, independence topics of their life. You literally say to them, is this the relationship you want to have with this topic? Are you sure? Or are you sleepwalking through life on that topic?
Yeah, it has a lot of power. You spoke about shock, and I think that it's a good way to shake people's belief to enter through taboo. It has the same power, I feel, that fear setting. I don't know if you've heard about the exercise of fear setting.
Fear setting.
It's when you look at your fears and you try to say, okay, this is what I fear in the next few months. What am I afraid of? Which is part of the taboo. And I feel it's a very strong tools to start moving. Have you published anything so that people can do the exercise on their own?
No, not yet.
Not
I
yet.
haven't. I have only research papers, but I haven't yet published anything. I'm first trying to sell it, and then
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But
selling, putting it online doesn't mean you can't sell it. You can do the workshop.
no, I'm joking. But like, it's also for me, anything that I put out there, I really want to test it first, because also
I'm a happy beta tester. It sounds
Thank
like
you very
a
much.
cool thing.
I will send you. But also, what I wanted to say is, when it comes to the shock, and this is also the reason why I said like that I still need to test it, is because you can really create a lot of damage as well to people, because also these, as I mentioned, like, these are sensitive topics, but some people may have very negative relationships with it, and it can be very triggering. And the second thing is that you can also, like, there is a certain level of shock that is good, and there's a certain level of shock that is going to lead you to people to leave the room and leave you and your work. These things really need to be calibrated in a good way, and they need to be tested. And also, they have to be very clear in who is it for, and measuring based on the person and based on the culture and based on the context.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what brought you to be on the edge? So for Croatia, the activism group for abortion rights, the research on taboo and online stuff, those things are not easy to do. You're rethinking the future, kind of. Where does it come from in your upbringing?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was an outsider from very early on. So for me, being to a certain level, unfortunately, because my mental health was not the best, but for me, being on a certain edge was not a foreign emotion or a foreign state to be in. So that is like the hard truth, let's put it that way. But also, from very young, I was a massively curious person, and I also saw myself to be a global person. So I remember, even when I was a kid, like 5, 6 years old, I knew that I was born in Croatia, but I didn't have the feeling like I need to be there. So I really had this very global sense. Like, I always knew there's this massive world, and I can choose to be in different places. And for me, it was never really about traveling. It was really like, I was always so fascinated by how people live in other places. So, for example, when I was also, and why people behave the way that they behave. So I remember, even in my first grade of primary school, I would be looking at people and I'd be thinking like, oh, he made that hand movement. Why did he make that hand movement? Maybe his father does that hand movement. Maybe his mother does. So it was really
How old were you when you do this?
7, 6.
Oh my God.
So I was really fascinated by that, and I was really
Could you
fascinated.
concentrate on the content of the school, or you were completely...
Yeah.
Yeah, you could.
Sometimes. Of course, if I would be chatting with that person, really not. But yeah, I was really always very curious of people. And I think one of my strongest values is definitely fairness. So I was an activist, firstly an animal rights activist when I was a kid. And then I turned to Greenpeace, and then I became for female rights. So yeah, it was a very, I think for me, the curiosity for sure, but it also this really strong feeling like this things should not be happening. It's not right for things should be. And to get also to make it very clear, like it's not easy for me. Like it took me what, a year to write on LinkedIn that I'm running things on abortion. And I didn't even write it on LinkedIn. I wrote it like just placed it at the bottom under the volunteer section because
Mm,
it's not easy. But I think for me that this ease is secondary to the feeling of this is the right thing to do. So I wouldn't say that I don't feel the struggle or that I don't feel the pain. And I think only this year in my life, I started to provide myself that freedom sometimes to not to be in that role, to turn a blind eye on things because it's
mm,
like it's physically you can't do that. And of course, the third thing is connecting myself with people and being surrounded with people who motivate me and who inspire me. I always say that there's no work that comes solo. No great work comes solo. And I'm really aware of that, that whatever work that I do is never just my work because it took someone to inspire me or it took someone to push me some to do things or someone who helped me actually create things. It's definitely also the people and the place that you are. But also, I think the final bit probably for me was having the strength or the courage to go for things is also actually my father. Like my father was a massively a person who did, I think he always says that he only for 4 years was working in his role. And he always told me like you can do whatever you want to do. You just have to be prepared that it's going to be a struggle to do it. So if you believe in stuff, go for it, but also know that it is gonna be hard. And I think hearing that as a kid, because I think he told me for the first time when I was like 10 or 11, hearing that when I was a kid was really like, oh, so like I can dream. And I can also be like thinking, oh yeah, I can travel to that country or I can travel to that country. And sometimes it became almost like on an autopilot. I remember when I was landing into Mumbai for my graduation, I was landing into Mumbai and I was like, Petra, you crazy. Like I realized until that moment, I haven't even thought about how hard it was going to be to do that work or to be in this other continent and culture that I have never been a part of. And I honestly, like I remember that moment. I was in the plane, I was looking at the golden lights of Mumbai and I was like, you really did not think, you really haven't. And I was just like throw myself into uncomfortable situations. And it also becomes, I think, and I don't know if you would agree with that, but sometimes that adrenaline can also become an addiction.
mm.
Like for me, sometimes having those uncomfortable conversations, it's almost like an addiction because you can feel a bit of that tingling in your body. Like you can feel like I'm on the border, like I'm on the edge. I'm doing these things that are like it's in you,
Exciting.
but
Yeah,
it's definitely exciting. Yeah. Yeah.
lovely. Two more questions.
Okay.
You pace yourself, you
Okay.
can make them short. One
Yeah.
thing is, what doubts do you have? We spoke about a lot of things that you know already
Yeah.
and that are strongly backed up by data and research. What
Yeah.
about the things that you're doubting about
Of
your life or about what you've been
mm,
doing?
oh man, you should not. I'm an early founder, so saying that is very triggering. I know I have a lot of doubts. A lot of doubts. I think one is also, and I think this is also being in a UK land because businesses in UK is very different than anywhere else. I always doubt like if people are gonna buy the work, if it's not this sort of traditional corporate selly kind of thing. And the second thing also that I'm doubting, but I'm also working on it currently, because I'm going for a really beautiful incubator. I hope so, in Spain. Just thinking about, like, how do you phrase the work? How much are you in it? And how much are you not in it? So to be a bit more concrete, I am thinking more of the strategy and of the if it's the best, and if it's something that also takes not just my work, but it also takes my character and myself in it. So on the business side, I'm very doubting. In life,
What business are you looking at? Is it taking the wisdom that you have and create an app or something like this?
no, not an app. I worked a lot in event management, and so I started literally the first event that I organized. I was 12, and then in high school again, and then I was working for a year in my bachelor's, and I did even here in the UK as well. So I'm thinking of if it should be actually events, or if it should be something corporate, or if it should be other things. So is it a platform? So I'm more thinking about the body of the work and how it should be created.
And the question about make it personal or not is how much is the business about you, whereas about a concept or brand that is independent from you. This is the question.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking about myself, or putting it myself, is because I realize that currently I'm rethinking a lot, and I think this happens with a lot of people, is how are other people going to perceive it, rather than giving how I think it should be, if you get me. So
Yeah.
because I think there's always that sort of calculating the both, is calculating, okay, I can say this, but if I'm also the person who's working for years on taboo topics and does not have any hesitation. So thinking, for example, whenever you do a LinkedIn post, you have to use the keywords that is from your client, or that what the client is going to read. So I'm thinking now how to kind of balance that out, and actually, because also the reason why I even started opening up the business in the first place was because people were coming to me. It was like for 2 years, people, organizations, some people who I haven't even spoken for a year would come and message me and saying, Petra, how can we phrase this? How can we work on this? What do you think about this? And I'm like, if I haven't spoken for you for a year, but you feel comfortable to come and talk to me about this, that means something. So then I'm like, okay, how can I actually create that so that I actually use who I am as a person that has provided space for people to feel comfortable to do that? And how do I create that? And also my skills, and not just thinking, oh, this is conventional consulting, has this form, so I should go that way, because people understand, because as we mentioned earlier, people don't understand when you say well-being. They don't know what it means. So how do I create tangible things that at the same time have my essence in it, that has brought me success so far? Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
last question,
Yeah.
if you were seeing yourself at the crossroads of some two paths, which are the two paths in front of you?
I have one. Okay, I know which is one. One is ego.
Okay.
So I place it as ego, because by ego,
So
often...
you're not going to choose this one. Do we need to talk about it?
No, okay.
I'm joking.
No, but the other one is potential happiness. And what I mean by potential is because I think often we are stuck in certain circles, and maybe not potential, but unknown happiness. And because we're often in life, I feel at least, we are thrown at learnings that we haven't learned before. And then we're like, oh, why is this happening again? And then you're like, why is it happening? Because you haven't learned something. And which means that often happiness can feel and manifest itself in things that we haven't experienced before. And then when we're there, we're like, oh, I don't know how to handle this, because I probably solved something before, which was much more familiar to me. And I think a lot of things that actually brings us happy, I think, and we all know that happiness is much more feared than dissatisfaction, because dissatisfaction we know and we can handle for life. And what if we get to be happy? What if we get to be in this certain environment where we feel good? We are actually more afraid that we're going to lose it.
Mm.
So I think that's why that's the two for me.
What is the ego bit, if you were to describe it a bit?
Yeah, ego bit is a lot has to do with my business. So it has to do with, am I satisfying? Do I have enough followers on LinkedIn? Have I the sort of approval from people, from the society, money? Being able to say, even I, for example, currently really walk on the lines between imposter syndrome and massive ego, because being able to say to people, oh, I'm an early founder, also brings me this like status in my head. No one
Mm.
is coming to me saying, oh, you're so cool. In my head, I'm like, I'm with the crowd. I'm with these founders, entrepreneurs. But on the other hand, I also have this really feeling like, oh yeah, I have no clue what I'm doing and I don't know what is happening. I feel like everyone is behaving in a certain way as if they read some books that I haven't read. Like everyone is doing this sort of code, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I can be polite, but if I in a minute, I always have need to joke around, always have the need to have.
Mm.
So for me, it's really like this sort of feeling I am not following the guide and certain sort of guide, and I don't know if I know enough to go to someone and sell something. So there's that imposter syndrome, but at the same time, when I see, I don't know, a LinkedIn post that is successful, I'm like, I got this. Look at that. Everyone is congratulating me. Everyone is liking this. Look at, I got the new connections. So there is a really satisfaction on things that are actually not important and that are actually based in certain insecurities or
Mm.
wantings for some sort of stickers from other people.
So both the doubt question and the crossroad question lead to authenticity and flowing with what have been powering you on the research side and on the
Yeah,
deep wisdom that you're sharing.
yeah. I feel like I was literally thinking about that yesterday. So I have a vision board, and I always write the vision board at the beginning of the year, and then I check it after some months, and I say, does this still need to be thought about? Does this still need to be checked? And I was just thinking like yesterday, fuck it all. I don't need to be in a certain way. And I think often also what happens is with ego, you focus on things that is not work. You focus on things of like approval from others, from this and that, networking and this bit. And of course, all of these things are important. It's like you can't have a business if you don't create some sort of a presence. But then on the other hand, I realized, oh my God, I have been focusing so much on these things instead of actually doing the work that would create impact, that can create a change. And then I was just like thinking yesterday, like how I need to create some sort of blinds for things and just do the work. And of course, you get the results. And especially if that work is based in pure intentions and intentions of creating a positive change.
Mm.
Because I don't think anything I don't think anything but success can come when you have pure intentions.
Yeah, it reminds me two people. One guy who organizes plant medicine retreats, and he was telling me, actually, you need to spend as much time or even more on communicating about your product. And that's someone who's been doing business for 10,
Mm,
15 years. And another person who I was working in the woods with yesterday, and she was like, I know, just focus on doing the work and the rest people will come. Don't worry about it. So
mm,
you have those two different approaches, and both are valid. I think if you're authentic in your marketing and this is part of your way of spreading the right word, it becomes almost part of your work because you're
mm,
sharing the truth online and as you would do it in a meeting. And on the other side, I also hear that person in the woods who's seen Gabor Mate building a huge following without
yeah,
putting anything online because he was doing the right thing.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
it's what is resonating with you at the core and what can you do
Yeah.
truthfully.
Let me get something just straight. Like, I'm not saying that, of course, networking and spreading the work, that's the information about you. That's incessantly. And as I said, like, you can't have any success if you don't have presence. But you first need to do the work in order to share that. And I created one Instagram post which was about how do you market yourself, because especially if you're doing the work in when it comes to social impact. So there was this one person who is in my environment currently, and that person is basically sharing a lot about how working on change and especially on EDI. But if you actually speak to people, the way that she does things gets so much bad mouthing. And so I'm saying, like, and I stopped and I thought, like, how can you say that you work on a certain change if the results of your work does not show that? Because especially if you're sharing, for example, if I'm taking myself as a person who is helping people with taboos, and I'm saying that, but where are the prints? Where is the actual material? And I think sometimes it's important to not just think about, okay, what is your intention to do things, but actually create that thing and succeed that intention. Because if I, for example, go for that workshop on which I'm creating now, and I say I'm trying to bust the taboos, I'm trying to enhance the well-being, that's all good if I'm talking about it, but I want people to feel it. And if you help people to feel the things, then that's 70% of your marketing. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah, exactly.
if you create a change in people, they're gonna be talking about it, they're gonna be feeling it, and yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the way.
Yeah. If the networking is a reflection or a bit of the program that you have behind the marketing, then you won because you created a mini experience of what you're giving after. And I think that's the
Yeah,
key.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Lovely. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
That's good. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.